All right, good afternoon. Marcus, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you all this afternoon. I had 4 years of high school Spanish, which did not translate very well with the taxi cab from the train station to here. So I think I'll do my presentation in English, and if you all can bear with me. Let me set the stage a little bit. What I want to talk about over the next 15 or 20 minutes is a number of things. Tell you a little bit about U.S. production. Tell you a little bit about sustainability. The theme for the conference is towards a sustainable biomass market, and sustainability is something that we take incredibly seriously in the U.S. But what I'd like to do is kind of set the stage of, our organization was formed in 2011, so coming up on 4 years ago, and it was formed to represent industrial producers. And to a certain extent, we had blinders on from a market perspective back then, because our producers were interested in selling pellets on a very large scale and large volumes to European utilities for the power sector under long-term offtake agreements. And the only way that we could put assets in the ground was to go out and get these long-term offtake agreements with utilities. And I remind Christian Rockos, who's right over there, who you all heard from earlier, of this all of the time. But Christian has been very much a visionary for the pellet industry as a whole, because back in 2011, he was saying to people like me, we understand that your members are selling into an industrial market, but we are heading towards a market where the lines blur between industrial and residential, where there one day will be, kind of one uniform quality. And that is very much coming to fruition today, and we're very much seeing that today. And so if you take our 62 member companies at UCIPA, many of whom are actual industrial pellet producers, what has happened is these producers are selling out of plants that produce 500,000 metric tons per plant. But what is happening is, and I was on the phone with one of my producers this morning in Georgia, who told me that they put a cargo on the water just last week that was contracted to the industrial market. Because that cargo and that producer has been N+ certified, it has actually traded hands 8 times, ocho tiempo, across the Atlantic. That's mind-boggling. It went from one U.S. producer to another U.S. producer to a U.S. trader to a European utility to another European utility to a residential trader that will ultimately be sold into the European residential market. And I find that incredibly exciting. And it just goes to show you how much our industry has evolved over the past 3 or 4 years where that is happening. And so my message to you is this, as we'll talk about in a minute, U.S. producers, our supply chain is set up, our supply chain is tested. We have been delivering on spec, on time, deliveries to European power manufacturers now for the past 4 years. And many of our members, if not the majority of our members, are now either currently N+ certified or are seeking the N+ certification so that they can do exactly what the member that I was speaking to this morning did, put a boat on the water and know that it may go to Drax or Vattenfall or Dong, but it also may very well end up in a boiler in a home in Austria or Denmark or Italy or Spain. And so we think that that's very exciting. So what I want to do now is tell you a little bit about the professionalism in the U.S. industry. We're very proud of our scaling of production capacity, and then talk also a lot about sustainability, some of the sustainability practices of our processes. So as you can see from the slide, U.S. total exports last year, a little over 3 million metric tons of pellets were exported from the U.S. last year. If you look at 2012, the differing color on the chart, it shows that 2012 was about half of that. So from 2012 to 2013, we doubled exports. We expect to double that again this year and likely double that again next year. And all of that's being driven by these long-term offtake agreements with European producers or with European utilities. Something to keep in mind, as I just talked about, just because I'm a U.S. producer and I've got a contract to deliver 50,000 metric tons monthly in bulk to somebody like Drax or somewhere else, the rule now, rather than the exception, is what I've just described, where those cargoes get traded around, because Drax may not need that shipment at that point in time. I may be able to go out onto the spot market and sell it for a higher price into some other area, and alleviate my counterparty's contractual obligations. So a lot of that is going on. What else is going on is that a lot of U.S. producers also have overage. When they built their plants had a nameplate capacity of 500,000 metric tons, but because they're running so well, and we're beginning to optimize those processes, the plant may actually be producing 100,000 metric tons. And so that, or 600,000 metric tons, which leaves 100,000 metric tons that can go into the spot market and can be used for the residential market. So, again, one of the key takeaways is that you're seeing a lot of mixing in industrial and residential, and I really do think that we are heading to kind of this one pellet standard, one pellet quality commoditization type of market. Where did our pellets go in 2012 and 2013? Far and away, the United Kingdom, that's our biggest industrial market. Behind that is Belgium and then Denmark. Netherlands falls behind that. And then we did a fair amount of trading in Italy, as well as rest of Europe, as we define it, which is about 3%. And I'd venture to say some U.S. pellets ended up here in Spain. We would very much like to grow that market. I would expect you all to see over the coming years many of our members spending more and more time here in Spain, in Italy, in Austria, Germany, France, talking about residential pellets. Okay, where are all of the pellets coming from? By far, most of the manufacturing facilities, really all of the manufacturing facilities in the United States are located in the U.S. Southeast. Why is that? The U.S. Southeast is blessed with an abundant natural resource of sustainable forestry. Any of you who have had the opportunity to come to the U.S. and fly over the Southeast, you will note that everywhere you see is trees. And forestry is a very big business in the U.S. So the plants that are noted here, each one is typically about 500,000 metric tons, which makes up a little over 3 million tons last year. We expect that to be in the neighborhood of 7 million. Next year, excuse me. So we locate in the Southeast for a couple of reasons. Because the trees are abundant, the byproducts are abundant. There's a very warm and wet growing season, which means that your average rotation cycle for a harvest is about 15 to 20 years as opposed to 25 or 30 years in the northeast of the country or the Pacific Northwest. And then finally, all of these locations, as you will see, are very close to port facilities. We're very concerned about greenhouse gas balance. And us being able to locate near port facilities mean that we can keep our greenhouse gas balance very low because we don't have to truck the pellets or put the pellets on trains very far distances. Another reason for the location in the U.S. Southeast. The U.S. Southeast, up until a few years ago, was home to the pulp and paper industry, the U.S. pulp and paper industry. As many of you are aware, that industry has declined considerably in the past 15 to 20 years. That forest product, the product that was going into pulp, commercial thinnings, needs a new home. Those lands have sat there for many years and nobody has harvested, which means that those lands risk conversion to real estate developments because most all of the land in the U.S. is held by private landowners. And private landowners have to keep their forests working. They have to have markets for their forests. If they don't, they'll convert those forests to something else, some other type of crop. So when you hear reports about sustainability in the U.S., one of the key things to recognize is that the decline, just the decline in the amount of fiber that's being used in the U.S. that was being used for pulp and paper, which represents, as you can see here on this graph, about 140 million metric tons per year. The pellet industry is only using a fraction of that decline. So that's a very compelling statistic that shows you kind of the abundancy of the natural resource in the U.S. Okay, let's talk about the kind of fiber that's being used for wood pellets in the U.S. If you are a private landowner in the U.S., you are growing trees in the U.S. for one purpose and one purpose only, for saw timber. That saw timber is being used for housing, and it is being used for furniture and other things of that nature. My members cannot afford to go to a logging site and purchase that saw timber for use as fiber in their pellets. It's way too expensive. It's about 4 or 5 times the cost of the fiber that we actually use. And I'll show you a slide in a minute that talks about that. But here's a picture of a logging site in the U.S. So if you look at the big logs that are laying on the floor there, and this is how they do it in the U.S., that is saw timber. And furniture dealers, sawmills, Lowe's, Home Depot, those type of lumber merchants are going to come and buy that saw timber and take that and use it to buy houses and to buy furniture. The low-grade wood fiber that's in the back that you see, the tops and limbs that come off of the trees when they're harvested, the commercial thinnings, the smaller trees, the weaker trees that are taken out to allow for the saw timber to grow bigger and stronger. We will take that as a byproduct. And then we'll also take diseased wood, knotted wood, crooked wood that is never going to be able to go into the saw timber market. So another key takeaway for today, our industry uses only byproducts of the forest industry. We do not use saw timber. We can't afford to use saw timber. We believe that there's a better use of that wood in other industries. This breaks down that proposition in a little bit more of a graphical way. But as you can see, the solid wood, the saw timber, that's going to go to the lumber. Your other types of timber is going to go to OSB and the paper industry. And then your tops and limbs and thinnings are going to come to our industry. Here's just a little more I believe these presentations will be made available afterwards, so more for people's reference than anything else, but a deeper dive on exactly the kind of timber that we're actually using in the U.S., that low-grade wood fiber. Okay, if you don't believe what I've just said, that we're not using the saw timber, let's peel back that economic onion a bit further and let me show you some of the pricing there. So that saw timber comes in at about $34 US per metric ton. The stuff that we're using, the biomass for energy, as you can see on this graph, comes in at about $5.40 per ton. So the quickest way for one of my members to go out of business very, very quickly is to go out and start using saw timber for pellet production. Nothing would drive that company out of business faster. We can only afford to use those residues. The Southeast U.S. is as I've discussed, is home to some of the most highly productive forests. As you can see, this little seedling here is a logging site 3 weeks post-harvest. If you move to 1 year post-harvest, you can see some brush growing in there. 6 years post-harvest, you actually have some fairly nice-looking trees. And then 10 years post-harvest, as you can see, and these are actual land sites in the southeastern U.S., you can see that has come back in a very nice way. Very quickly, I've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. There are a little over 750 million acres of forest area in the U.S. To put that in perspective, if you take the fiber basket of one of my members in the southeastern U.S., which would be about a 70-mile circular radius around that plant, there are going to be more forests, more volume of forests within that 70-mile radius of that plant than there is in the whole of the United Kingdom, which just goes to show you kind of the abundancy of the natural resource. Statistics prove that the more, we like to say in the U.S., nothing keeps forests working better than markets. So the more markets that there are in forests because they're owned by private landowners, the more we're going to be able to grow those forests. And we've been able to prove that really over the past 100 years. Very quickly, very, very strong federal, state, and local laws that are on the books in the U.S. that keep our producers honest and keep them doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. The Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Lacey Act, as well as state-developed and implemented best management practices. There are draconian laws on the books in the U.S. If you harvest somewhere where you're not supposed to be harvesting, the fines are outrageously expensive and they will actually send you to jail for doing that. So we have every motivation to make sure that what we're doing is being done properly and that we're preserving that natural resource. In sum, I think from a European end user perspective, what you can see is sustainable, high quality supply growing and coming from the U.S. It's a market that we're very excited about. And with that, I would take some questions.
Thanks a lot. ¿Alguna pregunta rápida? Yo creo que ya. Sí. Nombre y dedicación. The prices of energy, de la electricidad. What are the prices of energy? Electricity, power.
Industrial energy.
And the producer, how much does he pay per kilowatt electricity?
Per kilowatt, I actually do not. You mean to actually produce the pellet?
De gasoil. From the oil and the electricity. Precios de la electricidad y del gasoil.
Sí, ¿qué precio tiene ahí la electricidad y el gasoil? Para triturar y para comprimir. Vamos.
Pricing, the price of the electricity and the oil. Pero tú quieres saber, usted quiere saber el precio que repercute en la fabricación del pellet, sí. El coste energético en la fabricación del pellet. Okay. The energetic cost of producing a pellet.
So much of that information is proprietary, but what I can tell you is from an electricity perspective, most producers are actually using biomass power to produce the pellets themselves. so are taking bark and other types of residues and running those through their plants through biomass power facilities to create the pellets. There is some use of natural gas if some of those residues aren't available, but we're really using all of the renewable resources that we can.
Yeah, maybe this question could be answered by Prodesa, which is an expert on this and is an speaker. Luego le responderá esto a Prodesa, estoy seguro que será un speaker. Otra. Rápido, por favor. Next question.
Hola, muy buenas. Alfredo Martínez, Vitaliana para Pellet, productores y distribuidores. Hablaba del precio de la madera de sierra, que era inviable producir pellet a ese precio. La materia prima que utilizan, ¿a qué precio compran? Porque la madera de sierra nos ha dado un dato de $34 metro cúbico. La materia prima que realmente utilizan, ¿a qué precio la compran? Un margen de variación.
So
Muchas gracias.
The groundwood for sawmills, you're paying $34 US per ton. How much are you used to pay for the byproducts that you're using for the pellet?
So that was the last bar in the graph there. That's more in kind of the $5 to $6 range. The reason that, so remember, all of these plants have been financed on these long-term offtake agreements with European producers. Or with European generators, electricity generators, and so there's a cap on those contractual numbers per ton, and so there's no room to expand to kind of go to that $34 per metric ton to have that buying power. We're really stuck at that kind of $5.40 around that area, and those numbers are taken from a saw timber index called Forest to Market. So that fluctuates obviously, but that's a good kind of estimate.
Perfecto. Última pregunta.
Sí, soy Gonzalo Esteban de la Agencia de la Energía de Granada. Lo único que quería saber, el tipo de árboles más utilizado en las industrias de sus asociados, si son pinos, si son...
What are the main species that your members are using?
Species, so mostly you are seeing softwoods, loblolly pine grows very fast in the U.S. Southeast. You are seeing some hardwoods as well, but the majority is really that pine, that softwood pine.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, you. Gracias.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ed. Yeah.